Catwalking is a massive photo book full of so much documented runway history, and I thought it would be a wonderful time to just sit and flip through it with you. Catwalking is a massive book just full of fashion runway history on its own, and it's very impressive that Chris Moore has documented so much of that history just by himself. This book in particular is his work from 1954 all the way to 2017, which is so much. It's why this book is as massive as it is. But because it's so massive, I love that you truly get to see the different stages and evolution that runway has gone through, and also how the photography has changed over the years. In the beginning, you see that a lot of the photos throughout the 50s involves models who aren't necessarily on the runway, but they've been kind of, asked to step aside to take a photo. And it's really interesting that he includes things like his film scans as well with the complimentary photo. It just makes for a really nice page layout. And there's also tons of text throughout this book that just kind of goes over the period and what fashion was like and what the photography industry was like. It's very insightful, as well as just a bunch of eye candy thrown into a book. And then when you get to the 70s section, this is when we really start to see runway shows as we picture them today. There's a lot more catwalk photos. You get to see not only the models, but you get a glimpse as what the audience members look like. And during this time in fashion, cell phones weren't a thing. It's really cool seeing no cell phones in the crowd. And you see all the journalists with their pens and papers out, and everyone just absorbing the event that's happening in front of them, which we'll see later on that has changed completely. The 80s section of this book is one of my favorites, just because fashion in the 80s was very loud. And also this section has a few Vivienne Westwood photos. This part of the book is also where a lot of color photos start to appear. And it's just really awesome to see all the all the loud 80s colors. And 80s fashion was very interesting because it was coming out of the 70s, and the 70s color palette was a lot more muted, and it had primary colors as accents, whereas the 80s was very loud in terms of not only colors and patterns, but also the structure of garments. In the 80s, clothes just took up more space. We saw shoulder pads become very popular, as well as things like peplums and bubble hems. So fashion was just taking up a lot more room. And an interesting way that I see that translated into runway is you can see that shows were becoming a bit more of a performance. And I love the motion in these photographs. There's a joke amongst photographers that if your photo has unintentional blur or maybe a little bit too much grain, to just make it black and white, and that fixes it. Another thing that I really enjoy about this book is that there are a lot of little quotes from Chris Moore for each section. And this one says, "A good model is an intelligent woman. People don't think that. They think, oh, she's just good looking. No, it's more." And then again, it also just has a big section about what the atmosphere in fashion was like, as well as what the photography industry was like in the 90s. Another thing that I really enjoy about this book is that the photos aren't just of models on the catwalk, but you also get to see some candid photos behind the scenes. And those personally are my favorite. I love runway photos, but for me, these candid ones of the models getting ready behind the scenes and backstage, they just tell more of a story for me in terms of photography, and they make me feel more emotion. There's also really cool sections of, I'm not sure what the technical term is, they remind me of Polaroids that costume designers use for films in order to keep track of what actors are wearing for which scenes and what accessories to take note of. So they're photos of the models, and then they have written the designer who took the photo when the photo was taken. They feel almost tactile, even though I can't really touch it, but it's just a very interesting visual to have. I also enjoy seeing the inclusion of photos that have a bit more of an unconventional framing and composition of the models. And in the late 90s, shows were becoming more of a spectacle, especially with Alexander McQueen coming up in popularity. His shows have always been very avant-garde, and again we would see the continuation of the trend that was basically set for the spectacle of runway shows and just pushing the art form and the storytelling, not only through the clothing but also in the setting of which clothing is being presented. And it's very interesting seeing the difference between early photos where it seemed like the audience was right there, their noses were touching the catwalk, versus these larger sets that the audience is now pushed back quite a ways away. And then the last section of the book is 2010 to 2017, and this section is titled A Digital Revolution. And the quote by Chris Moore for this section is, "I embrace digital, I just think it's now." I really love that for someone who has been through so much of history, they're willing to embrace things like digital photography and also the introduction of social media and smartphones into the atmosphere, because I have some personal mixed feelings about it. Throughout this section, you not only see the journalists and critics with their pads and papers, but when it does show audience members, you can also see a ton of people with their phones out. And sometimes it's very distracting. There are plenty of photos where you can't see a single audience member, just because by this point, the stages for the big designer houses are just massive, and it's kind of rare now for audience members to be seated so close. But when they are, and they are in the photographs, you just see phones. So this book ends with a scan photo of a letter to Chris Moore, and it's from Vogue Studio, and it's dated the 26th of May, 1954. It says, Christopher Moore, and then his information, his mailing information. It says, "Dear Mr. Moore, this is just to confirm that I will be expecting you at the studio at 9 a.m. on Monday, the 31st of May, to start here as an assistant. Your salary will begin at £6 per week. I can also confirm that it will be in order for you to take your holiday for 1 week at the end of August, as already arranged by you. May I say that we are looking forward to having you work for us here. Yours sincerely," and then it's signed by the studio manager. And I just think this is a wonderful way to end the book. There's also a section opposite of it that really wraps up the end of the book and kind of going over how you condense so much history into one book. And the final paragraph is, "Ask Moore what makes a great show, what fascinates him about fashion, and he replies, a bit of drama, I suppose. I like a bit of poetry, a bit of art to a show. Then I feel that this is a designer. It's not just a man making clothes, it's something else." And as someone who really loves fashion, I just really love that little bit of this conversation with Chris. All of the text in this book is done by Alexander Fury, and he does a really great job of writing his interviews with Chris Moore, as well as a ton of other people who are in the industry. So if you are a bit of a fashion nerd and like to hear about the history, that is probably right up your alley. That is the end of Catwalking. I highly recommend this book to anyone who loves fashion history or fashion photography. And if you're someone who loves all sorts of photography and you are missing a fashion section to your collection, this is a really great one. It's absolutely massive. There is just so many photos in here. I wish I could show them to you all, but it's just a lot better to just sit and admire it
yourself. I feel like every time I open this book, there is something new that I did not even really notice the first time because there's just so much. If you stuck around to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. This was a lot of fun, and if you have any photo book recommendations, I'm always looking to expand my collection. And if you enjoyed me flipping through and discussing, reviewing photo books, let me know and we could do this again sometime. And of course, if you would like to see more, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, all the good YouTube jazz, and I will see you next time. Bye!